Hey everyone, welcome to HR Tech Talks. I'm so glad that you're here. I am Ben Eubanks, your host for the session today. And as always, these are so much fun for me, honestly, because I get a chance to talk to amazing companies, great leaders, about what they're doing, who they're serving, how the technologies work and fit into the work that we do as HR leaders every day. And so I get excited about these all the time. But today I'm especially pumped to have the conversation around retention and employee attrition and turnover and all those things. And is that a problem we can actually solve for? That regrettable turnover where someone leaves and we're like, if I had just known, we could have kept them. We could have at least made an effort or attempt to bring them in. And so I'm excited to dive into those things today with Ken Klein from Presidio. We're going to dive into, again, all kinds of fun stuff in and around that, how the tools help us to augment the things that we bring as humans to the table and what they're best at and those pieces of it. By the way, as always, if you're watching this on the live session here, welcome. So glad to have you. Please chime in. Let me know where you're listening from. I'd always love to see. I'm down here in Huntsville, Alabama, as always. If you're watching this on the replay, chime in. Let us know, because guess what? Someone who's watching this later on, they still get those same notifications. And so you get to have this kind of asynchronous conversation where if you ask a question, I don't care if you're watching this a day from now, a week from now, a month from now, ask a question. We can get our speaker back in, answer that question for you. And so one last thing before I bring our speaker on, he's like, please, if there are questions out there, if someone's curious about this, if you want to know something about employee turnover, employee retention, you have a question and you just want to throw it out there, go for it. He'd love to get to those if we have time today in the conversation. So, all right, enough talking by me. Let's go ahead and bring Ken onto the conversation and get into this. Hey, Ken, welcome, sir. Glad to have you.
Hi, good day.
So before we get into the retention stuff, I was kind of teeing up for the audience there. Would you take a minute, give us a little snippet about who you are and then what Presidio does as well, please?
Certainly. So my name is Ken Klein. I'm a co-founder of Presidio. We've developed a talent retention management platform. From a mission standpoint, we're focused on solving employee attrition.
Every time you say that, I'm like, I want to do a mic drop moment or something. It feels so powerful to say the solving employee attrition piece of that. Okay, so let's dive into this stuff. I'm really excited about it. I know, based on the work we've done, the research we've done, that humans are great at some things and not so great at others. For example, we're not made, our brains are not wired to look at dozens of different signals and figure out which one of those are leading to someone leaving our organization. All right, so I'd love to hear from you. How does technology fit into this? Because I don't want someone to hear us talking about this today, just hear this little snippet and think, oh, well, this is going to take over part of my job or something else. I want them to see how those fit together. So what's the tech really good at? And then where does the human step in to kind of complement that process? Can you answer that for me?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you think about talent data, I mean, it's everywhere. It's really a needle in the haystack phenomenon. But the problem is there's multiple haystacks that are always moving, and there's a growing number of new needles that are being added. So it's really a volume, velocity, and variety of data challenge. And that's where technology or machine learning really kicks in. Because you think about this, there's lots of weak, imperceptible signals. So human beings really can't see all these, certainly at the same time. The technology basically aggregates all these signals over time. And with machine learning, helps provide talent risk insights and root causes. So our product, ProCare, basically is processing hundreds of millions of metadata records from multiple enterprise systems concurrently. And then by applying these algorithms in real time, we can actually show in real time, who's at risk, why they're at risk, and what you need to do about it. So you can actually see employees that need help and what to do about it.
Golly, that's wild. And as you're saying, so the algorithm can do those things, right? It can help you pinpoint these areas and say, hey, for Ken, it's this thing, or these are the three things most likely to be driving his potential to turnover. But for Ben, it's these three things. And it can give you that really granular set of insights there. What about for the leaders listening to this, HR leaders, what is their role in this? How do they step in then? How do they know what to do? Or does it guide them down that path? Or is it just, okay, here's all the stuff, go figure out how to solve for that?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing HR leadership needs to focus on is really developing the conviction to address the Great Resignation head on in their organizations. So to really to prioritize and commit amongst all their other projects to tackle employee retention. So I think that's the first thing. And then there's really three things that they need to do, which is to really allow themselves to move beyond intuition and anecdotes and employee surveys and take the next step and really embrace a data-driven approach. Secondly, it's about moving from being very sort of responsive reactively to proactive attrition mitigation action. So moving from reactive to proactive. And thirdly, not that broad-based initiatives and programs are ineffective, but to realize that to address attrition, one has to be very personalized in this approach and leverage tools like ProCare to be able to do that. So those are really the three things that I would say that you have to do. It's almost like if you were in sales, I mean, you would never think about doing your job without a CRM. Well, you know, our point of view is that you really should not be taking on employee attrition without a talent retention management platform. And we've actually added the capabilities to be able to basically click to retain. And the great news is this makes the job of a HR professional or HR business partner much easier because, you know, first of all, they don't have to figure out where to prioritize. It shows you exactly what to do. It takes into account all of your data so that you can, for example, look at where your best managers are and how to replicate. And it confers credibility, right? The ability to basically go into a executive leadership meeting and actually present data as opposed to feelings or anecdotes. And we saw this with one of our customers, actually, an HR business partner was able to actually have a conversation with her entire, this, you know, she's sort of buried in the organization, was able to have an hour-long conversation with the leadership team around things like the management connection to employees, the amount of maker time, right? The growth that employees are experiencing. So it was very transformative by leveraging this technology.
You use so many good words in there that I wanted to tap into. The conviction one is a powerful one, I think, because I think you and I were talking about this before we started recording. I think one of the problems for some leaders is this feels so big, so hard, so difficult, or it's been a problem with them so long that they've given up on the idea of even changing. And so the first thing you said there was just conviction that we can solve at least some portion of this. And I think it's just, we have to believe again, essentially, and not to be too, you know, woo-woo or soft or fluffy or whatever else. Like, this is about using hard data, actual information to do this. So it comes back to that piece of it. But I can give you all the data I want to, but if you don't believe you can do it, it will not matter. It will not matter to any of those leaders. I want to ask you a question kind of to bounce off that just a little bit, because obviously everybody listening to this that wears an HR hat, they know that, yes, we can do a lot of stuff from our perspective, but there are also managers and leaders directly interfacing with these employees that often have a major impact on their likelihood to stick around, their happiness at work, all those kinds of things. And I'd love to hear from you. How does that fit into this? Because I know that a lot of leaders that I've run across over the years, especially frontline managers, like, hey, you've been here for a while, Ken. We're going to put a manager hat on you and let you lead others, even though you've never done it. Let us know if you have any questions. And that's not a great way of creating those leaders. Does this help them and give them some sort of paths or some sort of tools to figure out how to connect with their people, what's resonating with their people, what matters to them? Does it give them any kind of insight on those kind of things, or what it takes to keep them around?
Yeah, it really helps HR practitioners and leaders understand what their employees are really going through. Like, for example, how much time does an employee have to do their work where they're not in meetings or in between meetings? Like, how close are they to burnout? To be able to, so we've actually developed a technology called retention paths, which shows you a list of employees. Basically, they're similarly situated, they're approaching burnout, and what to do about that. And so, for example, one of our customers, they're able to free up 90 person years of time and return that time back to their employees so they could reduce their risk of burnout and, importantly, improve their overall productivity. Or another example was we were able to identify for a team that there was a small group of employees that were under-resourced. They were overworked and underpaid. It turned out to be all women, so it actually was hidden bias. So being able to surface that, leveraging machine learning, I think was really impactful to that organization.
That's really intriguing. I like that. I'd never thought about it through that lens of bias, but we talk about organizations being leaky buckets occasionally, where, hey, we're bringing in a lot of women or bringing in diverse talent, and we're also losing them at the same time because we're not actually solving the structural things that are causing them to leave in the first place. And so I love that this is actually helping employers that are saying, okay, well, this is a priority. We have a brand new research, for example, that just came out on hiring. Companies said, hey, D&I is a major priority for us, especially the bigger the company, the more emphasis they put there. But if you're just hiring and you're not doing the things that you're talking about here, and that great example of how if you don't solve some of these structural things and make sure that we're doing the right things on a pay equity perspective and opportunity perspective and those things, then it doesn't matter how much effort we put into this, because we're going to miss out and we're going to lose them on the back end of this.
As I say too, Ben, what's really been interesting in terms of what we've learned is that, it's been super interesting, that the employee issues tend to be concentrated amongst a small group of managers or job titles and cohorts. There's some good news there. That means that these are more easily addressable, right? It's not that there's a long tail to these things. There's concentration. So you could say, you know what, in this particular group, I have this issue. Maybe it's one of burnout or disconnection or lack of growth. I can address that and have an immediate impact.
So you've talked about a couple different things in this conversation so far. You mentioned pay in that example there about potentially being under-resourced or not getting paid enough. Those are drivers of people leaving the organization. You talked about maker time, which when you said that the first time to me, months ago, the first thing I imagined was, someone physically making something, but this involves anybody doing creative work that needs that time to focus. And that includes, by the way, us working in the HR profession. We need some time to actually do the work, not just sitting in meetings and talk about the work, because that doesn't lead to productive time. There are so many different signals in this. What about things like training or development opportunities, things like that? Does that also fit into this somehow?
Yeah, this actually, we sort of categorize it across sort of 5 dimensions, work life, where you pick up things like burnout, compensation, really important, obviously still, right, around, compa ratios, point and range. Connection turns out to be extremely important. How connected are you to your manager, to your coworkers? Are you, who are the super collaborators that you're interfacing with? If you lose one of them, it has really a very high impact on your sort of overall well-being and prospects for retention. Growth, and that's where you sort of alluded to, which is, how long have you been in your role? What's your time in role? But also, are you availing yourself to learning and development activities? Turns out that's really, really important. And finally, recognition. How are you being recognized, not only in terms of performance reviews and performance management, but by your peers as well? So growth, most directly, is certainly one of the 5 areas that's very, very important.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm glad you went into that, because I was going to ask you another question on the recognition piece. Again, going with that manager relationship piece, we had a comment from Norma saying that, kind of echoing what I said earlier, where we put managers in place and we don't give them the tools they need to actually be successful in that role. Most managers, especially new ones, if you handed them that list with nothing else attached, said, hey, here's 5 things to think about as you're working with your people day to day, that would give them insight if there was no data behind it. But to think about the richness of the insights behind what they're getting now, and being able to have those kind of detailed pieces based on each individual person that's working with them, that's incredible. One of the things that you said there was the connection one, and I wanted to come back to that really quickly, because we just finished this new study on hiring, and one of the things that we got from candidates, from workers, we said, what's most important to you when you're starting a job? And number 1 was, I just want to get up to speed and productive, right? I want to get my stuff done because you hired me to do a job, which is understandable. But right behind that was, I want to feel connected to my manager. Right behind that was, I want to feel connected to my peers. And right behind that, I want to feel connected to the company and the values and what we believe as an organization. So that connection piece you're talking about is so critical. And yet when people are onboarding, it's often like, here's all the policies. They don't stop to think about that connection piece and how to do that intentionally. And so you mentioned super collaborators. I want to restate that to make sure I have it right. If I'm a person who collaborates a lot across teams or within, with other people in the organization, if I leave, you said that makes other people who I can connect with most often more likely to leave as well. Is that what you were saying?
Exactly. I mean, potentially it's really incumbent on management to care for those super collaborators because I mean, if you don't, you're potentially going to experience a attrition catastrophe, right? And so our customers are using ProCare to identify who are those collaborators and paying special attention to those folks because they are so influential in the organization.
All right. We had a comment from Nancy I want to bring up for you, if you don't mind, because she said, it seems like companies have to be kind of have it together in order to use something like this. And I'd love to get your take on that. Do the companies have to come having all their stuff together and knowing where all the things are and everything? Or is it a little bit more of a guidance sort of process about where that data might come from or how to get it?
I think it's a case of meeting customers where they are in terms of their data maturity. It turns out that at least in terms of the way we've built our talent retention management product, it's really about whatever data is available, we'll use, right? The more data, obviously, the richer the portrait of what's going on becomes. But just to get started, it's really your HCM system with a couple of other systems layered against it. So, for example, calendar metadata, maybe some learning and development data, performance management data, and you're off and running. And even with that, you can get sort of 80% of the value immediately. So I think that we hear that a lot of customers say, I'm not ready. I don't have my data house in order. No one does, right? So, that shouldn't, that's really not an excuse not for getting going because there's enough data. And the nice thing about machine learning, the data does not have to be precise in order to provide you very rich insights and recommendations.
I was going to bounce off that a little bit and just say that that's one of those things everybody assumes that everyone else is better than they are. Yeah. And it's actually not the case. Most people are in a fairly good place. They have some basics there. There's always room for improvement, but you're not nearly as far behind as you think you might be. I had a chance to actually talk to one of your customers a couple months ago, an HR leader there, and she was telling me that was a key part for them was this helped them to get that picture of everything. Because one of the things we see in our research is the more tools you have in your HR technology ecosystem, the more you say you can do. We're more productive. We can just get more things done. But also you do that at the expense of clarity into what's happening. We have more tools, but that means more information scattered around. And so having this, pulling those things back together to say, okay, let's layer these things together and tell you what all that means. That's the piece that I think is most valuable out of something like this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's most valuable from my perspective because it gives you that insight that you don't get just from an HR system or just from a learning system or just from an engagement tool over there.
Yeah, it's basically, I think that's part of the power is this idea of pulling the data together and doing it in a really sort of easy way, leveraging APIs, leveraging just auto spreadsheet import. It doesn't have to be perfect. If it's a spreadsheet, we can pull that in automatically on a real-time basis. So it's amazing that once you do this, the things you learn. I mean, in every case, we're able to really show our customers, basically, allow them to see something that was unseen previously, and it's a wonderful thing because these things as you start to see them, they become really obvious in terms of what to do, right? So the nice thing is you start small. It's like start on a particular group where you have an attrition issue, focus on that, and you'll find some things to do, and then you just build out on this over time.
Yes. I've made that mistake, by the way, in the past in my own HR career where I tried to, let's solve this thing. And you can't eat an elephant in one bite. You got to start in some area where these are our critical employees. They turn over, we can't find another one. Yeah. Or it's going to cost
high potential employees, new hires, right? And I mean, the other thing is again, retention needs to be something that's done all of the time. The very moment that an employee signs an offer letter, we all realize that onboarding is important, but that's just the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. You need to think about this as a continuum for the entire journey of an employee.
Yes. We have some new data on ghosting that says it starts before onboarding, Ken. just a heads up on that one. Shalise had a really good question, and I think this is a good one for you because she said, retention and turnover, essentially she's been told they're not the same thing. And I know you talk about solving attrition specifically, right? Because turnover includes every person who leaves your organization, even those who do so involuntarily. And I think the focus you're talking about from a retention perspective and attrition is voluntary turnover, when someone leaves, go to a different job or leaves because they're not happy, right?
Yeah. That's what we're focused on. And presuming if you've done a good job of hiring, right, you want to retain everybody, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have hired these people to begin with, right? And so we really don't, discriminate between the two. We just assume that If you have an employee, you want to retain them. It's up to you in terms of how you prioritize, but fundamentally, we believe everybody is important.
Excellent. Okay. That was a great question, Celeste, by the way. Thanks for that. Because I've had that conversation in the past. I wrote a piece on that years ago because I became aware of that when my own leader was kind of saying, hey, I don't want to hear just about turnover across the board. I want to hear about the people who we lost that we shouldn't have. I want to hear about those people because that's what we need to fix that somehow. Let's figure out what to do next to solve for that problem. And so that's, again, revolves really closely around what we're talking about here. So we talked about all these different things, connection and growth and so many different areas. If you had to take all the work that you and the head and the rest of the team have done over the last couple of years and just boil it down to a couple things, what are the things that really work from a retention's perspective? And it could be that you're going to double down on those 5 you mentioned a minute ago. That's fine. Or it could be, hey, here's 3 practices that everybody should be doing, and yet most people aren't doing. I'd love to hear from you what some of those big picture things are after you've seen this work for a couple of years now.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing it's a little bit of, bringing the past back to the present, which is that it is still true that employees generally quit managers versus companies, right? I mean, to an employee, the company really is that first level manager. So it's really incumbent on HR to basically work closely with managers to make sure they're caring for employees across all the dimensions we've talked about: work life, compensation, connection, growth, and recognition, and to realize that employees are changing. They're dynamic, right? And so, that's why we believe in leveraging data, leveraging machine learning to basically surface up what's going on right now so you can address that. Second is what I mentioned to you before, which is that retention it begins the day that an employee signs an offer letter. You don't solve this with onboarding. You don't solve this with programs and initiatives. It has to be personalized. And the only way to do that is to process all this data and provide visibility on an individual level so that you can care for employees in a very bespoke way. And then thirdly, I think it's just really around just prioritization, right? To realize that the retention is a priority, right? I mean, just like all these other things in HR, certainly learning and development is a priority, talent acquisition is a priority, but retention is a priority. But it requires a new approach that's data-driven, right? It's sort of the step beyond surveys. It's proactive, meaning we're not chasing, resignation notes and texts around. We're actually getting ahead of things months in advance. And thirdly, it needs to be personalized, right? That you have to provide that personalized care and attention to an employee at the right point in time in order to make sure that they have you're addressing those long-term retention needs.
Oh, goodness, I love that. One of the things that we covered earlier that I want to come back to, if you don't mind, because I'd like to get your take on it. The compensation piece is one thing. Some of our research covers comp, and I know in the past, looking back at the data over a long time, you see that compensation, managers think that everyone leaves because of more money. And yet that's not often the biggest thing that drives people away. But I have seen at the same time, I say that to say this, I have seen that if you are working in an hourly role or in a frontline sort of position, where in the past it was, hey, for 50 cents more an hour, you can come over here, and you're like, no, you know what, Ken's a great boss, I'm going to stick with him, even though there's more money over there. But now it's, hey, you can go from $10 to $18 an hour over here, and suddenly that becomes a different draw. It becomes a stronger attractant than it had in the past, because that could be life changing for someone, almost doubling their income. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit, if you don't mind, on the comp stuff. You said you look at comp ratio and how equitable they are within the organization. Do you also look at external equity in the market and how they fit there?
Yeah. So one is, I do think there is a distinction between sort of hourly or blue collar and knowledge workers. And I would argue, and we see it in the data, that in terms of knowledge workers, comp is less of a factor than areas like work life, around, things like, burnout, connection, as we've talked about, growth and recognition. Yes, comp is an element of that, but it's not nearly as important as those other factors. But when it comes to comp, it turns out that there are sort of two sort of ways to look at comp. One is based on an external ratios, like external comp ratios, or point versus internal, in terms of the internal equity is much higher, has much higher import in terms of its impact on an employee. Why? Because if you're doing the same role, you've been in the, doing the same sorts of things, or maybe the same level, and been at the company about the same amount of time, and you're not being paid equitably internally, that's a much greater factor than the fact that you may be below market from an external perspective. So that's something we found that's actually been pretty curious in the data, but it's true.
Well, I would imagine it's probably happened even more lately when companies are saying, okay, now we can't find anybody. Now let's bump the pay rate up. And suddenly they come in with pay compression, and everybody else who's already there is like, hey, when's my turn?
The other danger is when you have an internal promotion, you give them a little bump in competition, but then you bring someone in from outside and they end up at a higher level than the person you've actually recently promoted. That inequity manifests in attrition. And those are kinds of things that we've been able to surface for our customers with ProCare.
There's also an element in there that'd be interesting to tease out of you mentioned earlier, the customer who had a group of women in one group that was underpaid. Generally speaking, to paint with a broad brush based on the data that are out there, women are less likely to negotiate. So if you're promoting, especially if you're promoting a woman internally versus you're hiring someone from outside, a man from outside, that could double the gap there.
Unfortunately, it's a real issue, right? It's they're asking, and Ben, you probably know the stats, but basically women, men generally are asking for sort of a bet, can you do better, multiple times more than a woman there. So they start up at a higher rate. And then internally, women are unfortunately seem to advocate less in terms of promotions and so forth. So this becomes something where a phenomenon where it just gets worse and worse over time. They start out lower, and the gap just increases over time. And that's why being able to spot this hidden bias, leveraging tools like ProCare becomes really important, because a lot of things get hidden by the law of averages, right? So you really want to understand what's going on beneath the surface, slice and dice the data to come up with, this team, in this case, these employees were in China, again, overworked, under-resourced, undercompensated. No one was really noticing, but but the nice thing about machine learning is it notices. You see these anomalies, you're able to surface that, and the company's able to address it, we felt really good about.
That was one of the big takeaways we had in a study a couple of years ago, an experiment we ran, was if you are not average, you are not heard in most cases. But this allows you to tease that out and dive into it in a way that, again, is purely human analysis. To bring it full circle to the first question today, that purely human analysis can't dig into the nuances there and find those things. So I've got so many, my notes over here scattered all over the place here. If someone is interested, wants to know more about what you and the team at Praisidio is doing, what's the best way for them to follow or connect?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to take the, to take the plunge, right? To, make a commitment to, see what your data is actually trying to tell you, right? So get your data into ProCare and experience a talent retention management platform for yourself with your own data. To get in touch with us, it's pretty simple. It's just www.presidio.com. And just, reach out, just hello@presidio.com. We'll answer if you have any questions, comments, please reach out to us.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you again, Ken, for joining me. I appreciate the insights. And every time I talk to you, I get some more knowledge about what's happening in that space and how to do it better. So I appreciate you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Great being with you, Ben.
Yes, sir. All right. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation with Ken today. So many good ideas. Again, I wrote down his top 5, right? Work, life, comp, connection, growth, recognition as key things, key indicators of retention there. And we heard so many things to go deeper into every one of those areas about ways we can look at this and solve for this in our own organizations. Thank you, all of you, Norma and Nancy and the others who are out there asking questions, making good comments. I appreciate all of you for joining us today. We'll catch you again next week on another episode of HR Tech Talks. Have a good one.